Are Cuban cigars the creme de la creme of cigars? Not really. Before you call the authorities and say, arrest this man, allow me to explain. You're tuned in to Smokin' Revelry. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. As I said, you are tuned in to Smokin' Revelry, and Smokin' Revelry is sponsored by Pariah Cigars and Casa Cueva Cigars. From our casa to yours, thank you so much for tuning in today, guys. Now, Cuban cigars. They have been the talk of many cigar smoker or aspiring cigar smoker, people who have a curiosity or fascination with cigars for, God, probably well over 100 years at the very least. Now, in the grand scheme of things, in the big picture, Cuba has the most experience when it comes to producing cigars. They have been doing it for goodness knows how long. It is just something of a myth and legend that has been perpetuated over the decades at how Cuban cigars are the best cigars out there. Now, I will say this, probably pre-revolution, pre-Fidel Castro and all that kind of stuff, Cuban cigars were really the best cigars there were around because they were the ones who were cranking them out the most. Now, that being said, I think during that time, there was a lot more care and precision gone into aging the tobacco and rolling it and making sure that the tobacco seed was planted and cultivated in the best regions with the best soil in Cuba. There was a lot more love and care going into the creation of Cuban cigars. Now, if you're wondering if I'm smoking a Cuban cigar, the answer is no. I'm actually smoking the Hati by Family by Loyalty Cigars. It's actually very good. It's kind of a light, more mild smoke, and it's a Robusto, so it kind of isn't going to take me forever to smoke. I tend to smoke non-Cuban cigars most of the time. One, they're far more accessible and easy to get here in the United States. And two, I have had my fair share of Cubans. And while I'm not put off from ever smoking one again, I can go long periods of time without smoking a Cuban. In fact, I'm a little bit, I would say, hesitant, maybe even a little weary of trying a cigar that somebody claims is Cuban, because let's face it, there's a lot of fakes out there, a lot of fake Cubans, and you tend to see them being peddled in places like Mexico and maybe other Central and South American countries, and you can usually tell pretty easily what's the real thing and what's not. But then again, sometimes it is hard to tell. I think the most obvious way to tell is what they're being sold in. Now, genuine Cubans tend to be sold in very nice boxes that look like they were made by not necessarily the manufacturer, but whoever they commission to create the boxes. And you've seen like Cohiba boxes, Bahique boxes, Monte Cristo, Partagas. They have beautiful boxes. Sometimes they're pretty simplistic. They're not wooden. They're a little bit more along the lines of a cardboard or just kind of a, more solid type box that's not wood. And more often than not, one of the ways you can tell, although this isn't 100% a way you can tell that it is a genuine box of Cuban cigars, is if it has a seal on it from S.A. Habanos, South American Habanos. They are the biggest distributor, well, really the only distributor of Cuban cigars out there. And that is one of the ways you can tell if you are getting the genuine article. However, if somebody is trying to push you to purchase a box of Cubans, faux Cuban cigars really, they're going to come in like kind of a cedar or pine wood type box or whatever it is, probably some kind of cedar box, but it's going to have a clear top, the kind you can kind of slide out after you break the seal. You can see through clearly to the cigars inside. And that is one of the ways you can tell that you are not getting genuine Cuban cigars. Now, has there ever been a point in history where in the sale of Cuban cigars or people hawking them or peddling them that there might have actually been some genuine Cuban cigars in that box? Possibly, but I would say 9.999 times out of 10, you are not going to be getting a real Cuban cigar in those shoddy boxes. Even if they have like the Ese Habanos seal on there and other stuff that makes it look a little bit more genuine, you're likely getting fakes. And if you're not convinced, go ahead and buy a box. You're going to get it at a steal, nowhere near the actual like MSRP price that you're going to be getting when you purchase a genuine box of Cubans, because, you know, they're trying to make a quick buck and they're selling you what looks like real Cuban cigars. And they do look very convincing, but you're going to find out really quick. I mean, even if you aren't a seasoned cigar smoker, once you start smoking it, it is not going to smoke anything like any cigar anywhere. Sometimes they'll mix in like stuff that's not tobacco. One of my friends, a good friend of mine, by the name of Marvin Benavides, who his family produces cigars. They're from Nicaragua, which, as I've said many times before, Nicaraguan tobacco is really my favorite. There hasn't been a single cigar that I've had Nicaraguan tobacco in that I didn't like, or at the very least I thought was decent. And he was telling me sometimes they'll throw in like banana leaves, the like aged banana leaves, and they'll wrap it in there with some of that tobacco, make it look nice and pretty, look convincing. When you smoke it, it's going to taste like shit. just to be 100% honest, it's going to taste like shit because, you know, you're mixing something in there that doesn't belong. It doesn't blend with the other aged leaves that are tobacco, and that combined with whatever filler or whatever, you know, fake filler they put in there, they ripped you off, and you're getting an absolute crap product just because they want to make a buck. So I will say that it is possible to get genuine Cubans. It's really hard to get them in the States. You kind of have to travel, or you have to go through different sources, legit sources. I'm not going to be citing anything shady, because it's actually somewhat easy to get Cuban cigars if you're buying them from other countries overseas, particularly in Europe. I think it's Switzerland has a pretty big market for Cuban cigars. They are legally distributed there. So if you wanted to, you know, purchase some Cuban cigars, you know, anywhere but Cuba, considering there's still plenty of embargoes in place, you might want to go through some of those channels. And if I can find anything that's legit and I can put it in the links down below, I will. That being said, I have smoked within the last 5 years, 6 years. Yeah, I've smoked a number of Cuban cigars. Now, for those of you who are not seasoned cigar smokers or who are very, very new to cigars, the question is often asked, and this question still gets asked from newbies all the time: are Cuban cigars as amazing as I've heard? Are Cuban cigars just this absolute like dream to smoke? They're just, you know, heavenly taste, heavenly aroma, etc., etc. And the answer is, well, that depends. Now, it shouldn't surprise anyone to find out that cigars are one of Cuba's major exports. Its other exports being refined fuels, sugar, pharmaceuticals, and nickel. Nickel is one of their exports. I had no idea that was, I thought it was like coffee, tobacco, and maybe like, I don't know, something else. Plantains. I don't know. We don't eat plantains much here in the United States, or not nearly as much as it's featured in Cuban food. But I was largely ignorant of what the actual top exports are from Cuba. But those are the handful of them, obviously, cigars being among them. Now, obviously, I didn't answer the question. Are Cuban cigars top dog? Are they the creme de la creme? Are they the best of all cigars? And again, that kind of depends. Because among the numerous Cuban cigars that I've smoked, and when I say numerous, I've smoked a lot of the same brands. I've smoked a lot of Montecristos. I've smoked a bunch of Partagas. I've smoked Bolivar. I've smoked Cohibas. Don't even get me started on them. In fact, staying on Cohiba for a second, Cohibas were like the cigars I smoked most when I first started smoking cigars at like the age of 19 or 20. Just because they were popular, and it was more about the cool factor for me. I wasn't really all that interested or even really informed when it came to like aroma and flavor notes and stuff like that. The only flavor notes I knew of was from my very first cigar, not Cohiba, but from a brand called Kojimar, and it was a vanilla infused cigar that was like sugar tipped on the cap. So it was very sweet, very tasty, went great with a cup of coffee. I remember actually going to this place called the Coffee Clutch in my hometown of Rancho Cucamonga at the time, and they had something called a coffee shake, which, you know, definitely kind of a fluffy frou-frou type of coffee drink. I prefer regular coffee now, not so much of the blended drinks, but at the time I was just barely drinking coffee, and, you know, I smoked it with that coffee shake. Delicious. I mean, it was just dessert. That's really all it was dessert. And, you know, my first cigar, flavored, infused, whatever you want to call it. And then I started smoking cohibas, and I honestly couldn't tell you what I tasted at the time. I just wanted to smoke cigars. Now, were they genuinely like Cuban cohibas? No. They were like the regional blended cohiba cigars, the ones that can actually be sold here in the United States, where they get their, you know, they may be Cuban seed, but they're grown in different countries like Nicaragua, Dominican Republic, Honduras, and places like that. So, you know, I wasn't interested in things like that at the time, because it kind of goes without saying that there's a cool factor that comes with cigars, smoking cigars. And do I think I'm like this cool guy while I'm smoking cigars? Not necessarily. I mean, I think I look good smoking them. I feel pretty good about myself when I'm smoking them. But, you know, at the time, I kind of wanted to smoke what was popular, what everybody else was smoking. So again, like kind of touching on when I first smoked a Cuban, I couldn't really tell you much about it because I was in my early 20s at the time. And I remember, I think I was in Vegas when I smoked it, and we were celebrating a good friend's 21st birthday. A guy by the name of Andy Van Dyke. He's actually been on this channel before, back when Cigar Show Tim and I were doing it together. And he was on a video about us, how to retrohale, basically. And, but it was his 21st birthday, and I think his father-in-law got some cigars for us, which I do believe were Cuban cigars. Don't ask me how or where he got them, but he brought them to the party, and we were hanging out at this nice, you know, beautiful condo where we're all staying and having, you know, a good time and smoking out on the balcony. And you know, I enjoyed smoking it just because I got to, it was about the experience of hanging with friends and getting to smoke a cigar for the first time in a while. And, you know, so far as I remember, it was pretty good, but I couldn't tell you much about it. It wouldn't be until I would say probably like 2018, 2019 when I started actually getting my hands on Cuban cigars, like through people like my dad, who he purchases Cubans fairly often through some of those, you know, websites and cigar retailers that I mentioned that are overseas. You know, I will admit, I think the first like real Cuban, so far as I knew it was a real Cuban, that I was given when I smoked it, I remember it being pretty good. I think it was, it might have been a Monte Cristo or something. I'm pretty sure it was given it to me by my dad. If not, then I think the actual Cuban cigar that I smoked, the one that I can remember most distinctly, happened to be a Cohiba. My in-laws went to Cuba, and they brought me back 4 cigars. And I would say probably out of all 4 of them, only one of them was really good, and it was that Cohiba. I tried a Monte Cristo Open Master. That was a disaster, and I know that rhymed, but it's true. The Master was a disaster. It was not master of anything. Definitely was not master of being a smokable cigar. It was packed and rolled so tight that I couldn't even get a wisp of smoke out of it. I tried for 15 minutes, and I even like tunneled it and dug into it and kind of squeezed it and molded it with my fingers to open it up. Nothing. Nada. I had a headache by the time it was done, and I basically was like, fuck this. I can't do this. Thus began my kind of troubled history with smoking Monte Cristo cigars, but I'm not going to get into that. Except to say, the following year, or maybe the same year, my dad bought me a box of cigars that were Petite Monte Cristo number 2s for my birthday, one of my birthdays. And it was 25 cigars, and that box lasted me a good long while. And the first one that I smoked was really good. But out of the 25, I would say maybe 4 of them were actually good, smokable, well constructed. The rest of them fell apart, rolled too tight. They didn't just, they were work. They weren't enjoyable. They were work. And I have found a similar pattern among other Cuban cigars I've smoked. Not all, but a number of them. Now, touching back on cigars being one of Cuba's major exports, within like the top 5 major exports that are sent to other areas of the world, obviously cigars are one of them, because cigars have Cuban cigars have a mystique to them. They're basically kind of this whole thing where it's a status symbol, or only people only Cuban cigars are good cigars, yada yada yada, whatever you've heard. There's just kind of this clout that surrounds them. But in recent years, and I can't tell you, maybe the last 5-10 years or so, and I think especially after some of the embargoes were lifted and Cuba was no longer under Fidel's boot, and it was no longer a dictatorship, it was only slightly easier to get them. You can go to Cuba and you can actually bring back cigars from your trip, but they have to be a limited dollar amount. You can't bring more than a certain dollar amount back to the United States. I think it's like $150. It may have changed in recent years. I don't know. It's been a while since I last heard, but you can bring some back with you. You just can't bring like boxes and boxes and boxes of it. But because Cuba has kind of opened up a little bit more, and there's slightly less restrictions when it comes to their exports, they're obviously going to be cranking out cigars at a record pace. The problem with that is that these major manufacturers of Cuban cigars, brands like Cohiba, and Cohiba just means Cuba, by the way, in case you were ever curious. Cohiba means Cuba, and Montecristo, Partagas, and stuff like that. They're cranking out these cigars really, really fast. And the problem with that is you cannot crank cigars out like super fast. Not like you would other products. There's certain products you can crank out pretty quick. But when it comes to like aging and fermenting the tobacco properly, making sure that they are, rolled and put together, properly and stuff like that. And even the regions where they are grown, the soil that they are grown in, there's a number of factors that go into making a great cigar. Not just Cuban cigars, but anywhere else. There needs to be a standard resting time so it can age or rest before it goes out to market. And, the people rolling the cigars need to have very, very careful hands and skilled hands, because hand rolling cigars is not something you just learn on the fly. It's something you are trained extensively to do. If you've ever watched videos of people rolling cigars, and I've had the great fortune of being able to watch a master roller at work, it's art. It's literally art. And if you're curious about who the master roller was, that's a guy by the name of Hamlet Paredes. He worked at the Partagas factory in Cuba years ago, and then he went to roll for Rocky Patel, and then he developed his own line of cigars, the Hamlet line, which I've tried. They're excellent. I met him. He's a really nice guy. Just really kind, really fun, really great to hang out with. And watching him do his thing, it is art. It takes skill. It's not something you can just learn in a day or two. You have to spend a lot of time, and you're going to roll a lot of bad cigars before you start rolling good ones. And the problem is, some of those factors I just mentioned, is that in a lot of these factories, they've got people being trained to roll cigars rather quickly, almost on the fly. They're being rapidly trained. You cannot be rapidly trained to roll cigars, much less work on the blends and stuff like that. Now, Cuban cigars, there's not much blending going on because it's all Cuban tobacco. But when it comes to rolling them, again, it takes a lot of skill, a lot of patience, and you need to take the proper amount of time to put the cigars together. It is a process, and one that cannot be hastily completed. But the curing and fermentation process is sped up. Why? So they can get the cigars rolled faster, and so they rapidly train the rollers. They roll them a little bit too fast, and there is a lot of room for error during those times. Because like I said, that Open Master that I smoked years ago, the one that I still think about and just makes my head hurt, it was terribly rolled. It was rolled so tight, I don't think you could I don't know what you could get through there. It would take like a lot of force, a lot of power to put, anything through that cigar, much less air and smoke. It was bad. And that is a sign of a very hastily put together cigar. And I didn't even have time to find out what the flavor was, because you can usually tell if it's a real Cuban cigar by the flavor. Cuban cigars have a very distinct flavor, and it's good. I've enjoyed it from the really good Cubans, the genuine Cubans. But ones that are put together all, lickety split, and you're not taking your time with them, they haven't been aged or fermented properly, there's going to be problems. And because these brands are among the top brands in the world, you could call them heritage brands, because they were among the first big names in cigars, and they originally came out of Cuba. Because you can buy Cohiba here in the United States. You can buy Monte Cristo here in the United States. You can buy Partagas. You can buy other brands that are not just only like Cuban cigars or Cuban seed, but they tend to be planted and cultivated in other parts of the world, like the countries I just mentioned, Nicaragua, Dominican Republic, Honduras, and wherever else grows and ages tobacco. And, you know, you might get a little bit of that Cuban flavor in there because they are Cuban seed, but they are grown in different parts of the world, different soil, different regions. So they're going to have a different flavor and aroma. And also, and I think this is the biggest thing, because one of the things I heard about Cuban soil is that it's a very unique kind of soil. It has different minerals and metals in there that kind of add to the distinct flavor and aroma of a Cuban cigar. You know, that combined with the fact that it is just seed, Cuban seed that is from that area, whatever region, you know, it's a fairly distinct and unique product. However, because of the demand for these cigars, they're starting to plant seeds and start farms, you know, tobacco farms in non-suitable areas of Cuba. And as a result, you're not getting as good a tobacco leaves. Doesn't matter if it's Cuban seed. Doesn't matter if you're going through the same process you would normally go through to grow it. The fact that you're planting it in unsuitable regions, it's gonna affect how it comes out. And as such, and I'm not the only one who knows about this, who has experienced this, who, you know, has heard, this has led to a serious decline in Cuban cigars in terms of their quality, their construction, their flavor, things like that. I have, you know, again, I've had a number of Cuban cigars that were fantastic. They were so good. I really enjoyed them. And again, I would gladly smoke a Cuban again. In fact, I think as recently as, you know, within the last couple of months, I have smoked a Cuban or two with my dad. He handed me, I think, like a Bolivar cigar. Very good. I think, yeah, that's the only Cuban I've smoked in recent memory is Bolivar. But, you know, there, unfortunately, for every 2 to 4, however many Cubans, I've smoked a bunch of bad ones. Just ones that had issues, you know, whether it was the flavor, the draw, the construction, all of that. When you're hastily trying to crank out cigars, which you cannot be hasty with, you're going to get not a great experience when you smoke it. The moment you light it, you may start seeing problems. There have been times I lit a Cuban cigar and the foot cracked immediately and the wrapper came unraveled like crazy fast. And this is in no way to say like these manufacturers suck or anything like that, but there's a lot of things happening that are unfortunately adding to the decline of the quality of Cuban cigars. So again, are Cuban cigars like top of the line? Well, in terms of popularity and demand, yeah, they really are. They are among, I mean, they're cranking them out like crazy. People want to smoke Cuban cigars. They want to try Cuban cigars. And there are some people who, you know, those that can afford it, who are able to get Cuban cigars on the regular, smoke them regularly. That's all they smoke. I find that weird, but that's just me. I've talked about just smoking one type or one brand of cigars. I don't know why you would limit yourself like that, but that's just my opinion and the opinion of a number of my friends. But, you know, there's some people who smoke strictly Cuban cigars, or those are the cigars they smoke most regularly. And you could never tell them that, you know, Cubans are bad cigars. And, you know, maybe they have an in somewhere where they're able to get some very well done and well aged cigars. I don't know. Doesn't really matter because, again, it just depends. You may end up getting a box of just home run cigars. They just knock them out of the park every time. But it's hit and miss. You may end up getting one cigar out of a box of 20 that is good. You may have half the box that's good or just a few. It really depends because, unfortunately, because of the demand and the rapid production, Cuban cigars are kind of, they're losing their appeal, they're losing their mystique, and they're definitely losing quality. It's unfortunate, but it's currently what's happening. But I still would very much recommend, if you're able to get your hands on Cuban cigars, definitely try them. They're worth trying. It's part of the experience. You want to try as many cigars as you can, regardless of where they're from. And you're not always going to get a great experience. And that goes for almost any cigar brand out there, regardless of where the tobacco is from. Sometimes there's errors in the process. Sometimes there's a bad batch. Sometimes there's a bunch of cigars that get put out that just are having issues, and it could be how they were made, how they were aged, how they were stored, yada, yada, yada. They usually say it takes anywhere from, like, I think the average number is like 300 hands to touch one cigar before it is ready to go. And that's no joke. Hundreds of hands handle that tobacco and in various ways up until the rolling process and when they go to rest. And I think that's one of the most important parts. I mean, not that there's any less important part to processing a cigar, getting it ready to go out to market. But you want to make sure that it rests. Give it proper resting time. If you can, draw test it. I mean, take time to test your product so that way you know that your customer's going to like it. I mean, a lot of the smaller boutique brands fortunately have a little bit more time to do that, just because, they're not of the same magnitude of, Cuban cigar manufacturers, but at the same time, they want to put out a quality product. So they're going to take some extra time with it. And, while there is demand for boutique cigars, I think now more than ever, the demand for, heritage brands and Cuban cigars is still pretty high, higher than boutique brands. So they're going to have a higher demand and higher production rate to suit that demand. And boutique brands have a little bit more leeway when it comes to testing and taking time with the product. So again, it's hit and miss. You're always going to find a cigar that may not be that great. I don't think I've ever smoked a bad cigar in terms of like the flavor was so disgusting I wanted to puke. Well, maybe one time, but we won't talk about that. Most cigars are decent. Even Cuban cigars, they may have issues. They may not be super fantastic, mind-blowing, like, people will talk about sometimes because of just the mystique that surrounds them, the clout that surrounds them. But you're always taking a little bit of a risk when you try a cigar because it may not be that great. Then again, it may be mind-blowing. Again, just depends. That goes for Cuban cigars and cigars that are made anywhere else. So all I can say is don't just go based off the hype. Try it for yourself. See if you like it. You may think Cubans are the best cigars out there, and you are perfectly entitled to think that. You have every reason to think that if you had a great experience time after time. Sure, they may be the best for you, but not for everyone. And I think lately, unfortunately, they're losing a little bit of that appeal. Anyways, guys, I really hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was informative. I hope you learned something. I hope it was educational. I hope it was entertaining. And I really hope that you didn't see this video as me shitting on Cuban cigars. Not it at all, because again, I've had some fantastic Cuban cigars. Just when you're trying to crank something out like this, I mean, imagine a whiskey company like not really taking the time to ferment and age their whiskey. You think about a good bourbon. You don't take the time to properly, filter it, let it age, let it sit in barrels, making sure you're getting the exact flavor you want to get from a good bourbon, the color, all of that kind of stuff. You're going to get really shitty bourbon. You can't rush it, I mean, there's a process to it. I mean, you definitely can't put it out too early, because then you're basically drinking, straight alcohol or moonshine, and you can actually go blind from drinking some of that shit. There's a process. You can't rush that process. And, as my good friends at Pariah Cigars, Frankie and Miguel would tell you, and one of their cigars is named this, you got to trust the process, and you have to be willing to take the time to trust the process. Anyways, guys, that's it for this video. Again, hope you enjoyed it. If you haven't subscribed, please do. And also like this video, comment on this video. It really helps with my visibility on YouTube. And also I like interacting with you guys, so please leave a comment and I will respond to every comment you leave, I promise. And again, hope you guys are doing well. Hope you guys are staying healthy and staying safe, keeping it smoky as always. And of course, I will see you guys next time.